So I hope that all of you were able to get a slice of the pumpkin cake, and also if you picked up this piece of paper, it has the recipe of that pumpkin cake, and then Miss Michelle has included some pumpkin seed recipe on the bottom. The pumpkin cake, it says it's Grandma Nichols pumpkin cake. Grandma Nichols is my great-grandmother. I knew her until I was about 2, and then she went to be with Jesus. She would make this delicious, amazing cake for the holidays, and then of course she passed that down to her daughter, which was my grandma, Isla Beth. And my grandma was really not a good cook. I will just say that, because she was good at many things, but not cooking. Somehow we still had amazing meals and great times together. Lots of family would gather. But what she was really good at was making this cake. And we always expected it to be there and always wanted it there. And from the time I was young, I can just remember begging and looking forward to having the pumpkin cake. Of course, it had to be passed down to my mother, and she also was not a good cook, and I can just say that because she did not come today. I love my mother. There are things she can cook really well, but let's just say, we made it, we survived. But the pumpkin cake stayed the same, and she was able to cook that as well. And so, knowing that we were going to do a pumpkin presentation, I called her up and I said, "Mom, would you please make the pumpkin cake? I really want to share it. We've loved it for so many years." And she said she would. And I said, "Well, they really want the recipe so that they can print it out." And she said, "Okay, you can have it." And so because of this Lunch and Learn, I am now able to have the recipe, and thank you. And so I can pass that on to you guys. Okay, so. Yes, ma'am.
I was going to say, I do not like any shape or form of pumpkin as far as being cooked or baked, but that cake is wonderful. You're right. I do not like pumpkin at all, but that is good.
And it doesn't have an icing topping. You're welcome to figure one out or put it on there if you want, but we've never had icing on top of it. We just eat it like it is. And another thing is, if you have leftovers, which we barely would, you can eat them for breakfast. You can eat it for breakfast. It was delicious for breakfast. So I'm just really grateful to have something like that in my family that's been passed down. I feel really honored. And now it's finally going to be mine, and hopefully my tradition. And I'm sharing it with you today, so you're welcome. Alrighty, so today we are here to celebrate the fall and talk about pumpkins, because it's nice and cool out, and no it isn't, not yet. It's been fall since September 22nd, but we're still waiting on that cool weather. So pumpkins. We all know what a pumpkin is. We see pumpkins every fall, especially in October. Pumpkins are something that we kind of associate with squash and vegetable maybe, but actually, technically speaking, a pumpkin is a fruit, okay? It contains seeds. So in botany, in the science world, a fruit is a seed-bearing structure in flowering plants formed from the ovary after flowering. Pumpkins are a squash. They're a winter squash and are closely related to cucumbers and melons. Okay, so we're just going to go over a few facts about these beautiful fruits. And I love in JMG when I'm teaching the kiddos, I get to tell them that a pumpkin is really a fruit. And their eyes get real big, like, what? All right, seeds. Pumpkins have about 500 seeds, and I know that I have personally ripped the seeds out of pumpkins so that I can make a jack-o'-lantern, but I have never counted, and I never knew there were 500 seeds, but that does make sense. They take between 90 and 100 days to grow, which is why it's recommended to plant them between May and July. They're high in iron. The seeds can be roasted to eat. I'm sure a lot of you have already tried pumpkin seeds. My kids actually like pumpkin seeds, which was surprising, but super fun to roast those. The flowers that grow on pumpkin vines are also edible, and every single part of the pumpkin is edible as well. So the skin, the leaves, flowers, the pulp, the seeds, even the stem is edible. So you'll need to bring a recipe to me for that, because I don't know how we would eat the stem. Different varieties. There are more than 45 different varieties of pumpkin. They come in all different shapes and sizes. They range in colors, red, yellow, green. They've got some funny names sometimes, like hooligan, cotton candy, orange smoothie. I think people just have a really fun time with that, just giving them funny names. Let's see here. All right, so there's over 1.5 billion pounds of pumpkins produced each year in the United States. I think because we like to decorate with them, and of course we like to eat. The top pumpkin producing states are going to be Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and of course California. Let's see, so in Morton, Illinois, they call themselves the pumpkin capital of the world. According to the University of Illinois, 95% of the pumpkins grown in the United States are harvested in Illinois soil. Morton is allegedly responsible for 80% of the world's canned pumpkin production. It'd be fun to go there someday. Alrighty, so October and fall, of course. So pumpkins, they grow all over the world, not just here in the United States. They do not grow in Antarctica. Are you surprised? I'm not. 80% of the U.S. pumpkin crop is available during October. I think that might be why we have the pumpkins everywhere during that month. Out of the total 1.5 billion pounds, over 800 million pumpkins are ripe for the picking in a single month of the year. Hence the name, the harvesting season. Okay, so here's a gentleman. His name is Jamie Graham of Tingsboro, Massachusetts. He just broke the New England Giant Pumpkin Growers Contest record for biggest pumpkin at the Topsfield Fair last Friday. So he lugged a whopping 2,480 pound pumpkin to Topsfield, knocking out the previous record holder by nearly 200 pounds, according to a fair spokesperson. He also won a cash prize of $8,522. The previous record holder was a 2,294 pound pumpkin grown by Alex Noble of Connecticut. So while Graham's pumpkin is a feat to behold, the pumpkin that holds the world record for largest squash as of November of 21 is owned by an Italian farmer, Stefano Coltrippi of Chianti, Tuscany. Coltrippi's pumpkin weighs just a little over 2,700 pounds. That's more than a Nissan Micra car, or about the same as 17 and a half adult men. That's what Guinness Book of World Records said. I don't know how they moved that thing. My favorite, nutrition. That's what I talk to the kiddos about in JMG. Pumpkin, they're packed with nutrition. Of course, they're cholesterol-free and sodium-free and fat-free, but they're a good source of fiber. 1 cup of pumpkin will contain 87% of the daily recommended vitamin A intake. It's 1.5 grams of protein, 0.17 grams of fat there. It says 49 calories, 2.7 grams of fiber, and 12 grams of carbs. 1 cup of cooked pumpkin contains 49%, almost half, of your daily value of vitamin K, C, E, potassium, iron, folate, and niacin. 50%. You're not going to get that from hardly any other food. They contain antioxidant beta-carotene, which fights off infection and protects the skin from UV rays. Who knew, right? They're shown to prevent age-related vision loss with a large amount of beta-carotene, which converts to vitamin A. Man, let's just all go get some pumpkin. Newsflash. So canned pumpkin isn't actually pumpkin. It's Dickinson, excuse me. A relative of butternut and acorn squash. Now butternut and acorn are delicious as well. So if they want to call it pumpkin, I don't know. That's fine with me. The best way to be sure to have pure pumpkin is to puree your own quote-unquote pie or sugar pumpkin. Has to be that kind. They're much smaller than the ones we carve. Okay, so you want to look for a pie pumpkin or a sugar pumpkin. It's kind of funny, the one that's good for you is called a sugar pumpkin. A 3-pound pumpkin will give you the same amount as in a can of store-bought pumpkin. So just get yourself a little 3-pounder and puree it, and you're ready to go.
All right, well, I'll start with the fact that I'm a pumpkinaholic. I'll admit to it right now. My husband thinks we have way too many pumpkins. I think we could always use more. So seriously, I am just in love with pumpkins. I love them for so many reasons. One of the things that I enjoy about pumpkins is that I love fall, and you can decorate in like the 1st of September, and it is worth, it can stay on your table and stay decorating until December. So you can get months of use out of that pumpkin and decoration. You don't have to be like Christmas where you throw it up for 3 weeks and then take it back down again. So, so I really enjoy that. I love to grow pumpkins. This is a picture of one angle of one of my pumpkin patches, and this is when it's under control. Now, when it's not under control, it's taking over everything in the garden, which is where it's at right now. But this is actually a wagon full that I actually harvested in July, before the temperatures got so out of control this year. But you can see several pumpkins on the vine. Now, my pumpkins with this heat this year quit setting pumpkins around July-ish. So everything that was on the vine ripened and I harvested those. But when the cool spell, relative speaking, hit, my pumpkins started setting again. And so now I am just overloaded with new pumpkins on the vines. I was telling Richard, I have a span that's about this long that has 4 and 5 pumpkins coming on it. So when they get big, this is going to be tons of pumpkins. And I already harvested around 30 so far this year. So we're going to be busting at the seams this year, which is great because I have pigs which are really enjoying it. So this is a picture of my pumpkins taking over the trees outside of my garden, and they literally will grow into the trees, and I'm in there with my scissors and my shears cutting them down when there's time to harvest. Pumpkins are used for so many things. As we've seen, they're used for pumpkin pie, pumpkin spice lattes. We love the pumpkin cakes and pumpkin soups. I mean, there are just so many ways to use pumpkin, as Jamelle was talking about. You can even do pumpkin soufflés and pumpkin breads. I mean, pumpkin is just wonderful. One of my favorite ways of doing it is feeding my animals with it. So these are some pictures of animals. Goats also like them, that just enjoy pumpkins. And so for me, because I have several different variety of animals, what I do is I have a cold room and I store them through the winter so that I can keep feeding them throughout the winter months. And I literally will end up giving my last pumpkin to my chickens about the time that my pumpkins are coming off the vine. So they can store really well if you handle it right. So one of the things I also love to do is decorate with pumpkins. So I literally put pumpkins everywhere. They're all around my house. They're all outside my house. And I just love pumpkins. And you'll know that I also do fake with real mixtures. But okay, so let's talk about how to grow pumpkins. Pumpkins require a long growing season, and so luckily here we usually have enough time to, if we can delay even getting them in the ground till June possibly. I'm always like seeding them early, like in February inside, and then moving them outside, or I start them as early as I can because I do love to get as many pumpkins as possible. But if you do transplant them, you have to be very careful. They're not super hardy. Their roots are very fragile, so you do have to be really careful when transplanting them. When you grow a pumpkin, one of the things that's important is they need a really fertile ground. And so prepare the soil really well ahead of time with lots of natural ingredients. I personally use a combo of manure, compost, wood chips in the layering system, so it's got lots and lots of nutrients. There are other things you can add as well to just help that seed to have the best start possible. You want to plant it 1 to 2 inches, and they suggest you hill it up just to make sure that it also gets warmer faster if your ground is still a little cool. If it's hilled up, the seeds will get a little bit warmer and germinate a little faster. So if you are planting directly into the ground, that's one of the things you can do. After you add your various ingredients of fertilizers, it's advised that you work it into the top 8 inches. You want that to really get into the top layers of your soil so that it can really penetrate well, for that seed to have good chance to make use of all of that. And space your vines accordingly. These things are monstrous, as we've already said. They will grow really fast and really big. I typically, even though you're not supposed to, I typically plant 3 seeds in each hole, just because, what are the odds? Not all of them are going to always germinate. Sometimes I have them all germinate, but I have the space that I could just let them do their thing. If you're limited, I would maybe, move them when they start to sprout and give yourself a little more space, because they do better if they've got more room to roam. And then, obviously mulch really well underneath them. I have gone to putting cardboard down the area that my plants, because they have a bed where I plant my plants, but then they exceed that very quickly and take over the world. And so when they take off into my other part of the garden, the weeds get taller than the plants do, and it can be really difficult. So I've just started laying cardboard up there, and then they run across the cardboard. And that way it keeps your weeds under control. It also gives your pumpkin a little bit of a buffer between the ground and the pumpkin, and they don't rot as fast as well. So that's important. They do love full sun, as much sun as you can give them. They must have extremely well-drained soil. If you're like me, you have sand, which is a plus for that. If you have clay, that can be a problem. So you just have to make sure that it's super well drained, because those roots will rot, and then your vine will turn mushy, and you won't have any really good success with that. They do take, as Jamelle mentioned, about 120 days, 120 rough days from the time it sets to harvest. So, or time you plant to harvest. So you just want to calculate that when you're planting your seeds as to when you'd like to have them. So if you're shooting for the October time frame, kind of back it up. If you just don't care, you can plant them whenever it starts to get warm enough. Obviously, you don't put these in the ground until after the first frost, because they are very susceptible to frost. So you have to wait until after that. Pumpkins need a lot of water. If you don't have a good watering system, then it's going to be problematic for your pumpkins to thrive. They need at least 1 inch a week, more preferably, because they really do just drink tons and tons and tons of water. Now, one of the things that they say you can do is you can prune your vines to concentrate your growth to the pumpkins that are on the vine. I don't do that because I love them climbing all over the place, and I don't care how many they produce. If you are limited though in your space, you can certainly just keep pruning and allow your vines to stay close. One thing I will say though, we'll get to the flowers here in just a second, but the male flowers always come on first, and they will set a lot of male flowers before the female flowers start to come on. And I always wondered about that, but it's because it's calling to the pollinators. Hey, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. So by the time the female flowers have come on, the pollinators know where they are, and they're there to pollinate the females. So it's kind of a good thing. They do the calling ahead for you. One of the things that is also good for pumpkins is planting oregano or somebody help me. Nasturtium, thank you. Near your pumpkin, because they attract the right kind of bugs to eat the beetles and things that might attack your pumpkins. So you could have some of this on the perimeter or next to it. If you have it too close to the vine, it's going to get squished in no matter of time. So you might even want to have it in pots that you can move as your vine gets more and more aggressive. But these do help to keep some of the bug problems at bay. Now, the flowers, I'm sure most of you already know this, but there are male and female flowers. And the female obviously has the fruit and the male does not. That's why I was saying earlier, in the very beginning, you'll see a lot of the male flowers setting on, and just a small, the female will start to come on a little bit after that. One of the things that's real important about pollinators, and by the way, this is a picture from my garden. I love to take pictures of my bees on my flowers when I'm out there first thing in the morning. And I learned something while doing this, because I thought they were just regular bees. Well, they're not. They're a special kind of bee. They're called squash bees. And they pollinate only the squash and pumpkin family. That's it. And the reason being is, if you've ever been out into a pumpkin patch, those flowers are open early, but then they close up about midday. Well, honeybees they're late risers, and they don't like cool. So they come out about noon. Well, they would miss the opportunity. Plus, those flowers don't really have the nectar they're looking for. These bees are called, here we are, here's a picture of them, close-up squash bees. The reason they're so amazing is they love this sticky pollen that sticks all to them. Honeybees hate it. They don't like that. They're after the nectar. They don't like to be covered with this pollen. Well, these guys collect all this pollen on their bodies, and they build a nest in the ground. And they're solitary bee hole. They don't go to a hive. There's not a bunch of them together. It's a single female that will dig a hole, and she'll lay her eggs and then stuff it full of the pollen that she's harvested off of those flowers. And after she gets them all full, then she does another one, and she just keeps going. And then when she's ready to hibernate for the winter, she digs one for herself, fills it full of pollen, and she hides herself and waits till spring. And it's always on the outside of your patch. So if you see a bee going in the ground outside of your pumpkin or squash patch, it's probably a squash bee. Pretty cool, huh? I didn't know that. I don't know if y'all knew that, but I didn't know that before today. And it also only takes about 6 to 10 squash bees to completely pollinate a female flower. Well, I don't know about y'all, but my pumpkin patch probably has 50 every morning when I'm out there. So you can just imagine, how much good they're doing in such a short time. So, they're all done. They can get their job done in the morning in about an hour and a half, and they're done. And they go off to do their thing. So you have to be out there fairly early to see them. And then after that, they go do their thing in their little holes. So anyway. Okay, so harvest time. When is the best time to harvest pumpkins? Now, there's a lot of tricks to this. You can do the thumping test that people talk about if you hear the hollow sound. I grow mainly the Cinderella pumpkins, the fairy tale pumpkins. I also grow the blue pumpkins and the white pumpkins. I'm just remembered my white pumpkin was sitting on the front porch and I forgot to grab it. Okay, so anyway, I have a big white pumpkin. And I go by color on those guys because color to me is when to know. When they start turning like this one is right here, I go ahead and pick it. You can wait till it's fully orange, but number one, I'm not really eating these as much as they're more for my animals. If you were eating it, you'd want it to get fully ripe. If it's not really for you, but for animals, it's not as critical. But if you pick them when they're super green, like this one, they're not going to last as long potentially because they're not as ripe. So you do have to watch about that. You should always harvest on a dry, warm day. Cut with a sharp knife. These things can be prickly, so you want to really cut them good. Don't pick them up by the stem. And let's see, what else do we want to say? If the handle falls off of your pumpkin, it will deteriorate very, very quickly. So you really want to guard those handles. I never pick it up by the handle. And I will say this, the pie pumpkins and the Halloween pumpkins are in a different category than the pumpkins I grow. Those pumpkins do not last as long. Even if you go through the whole hardening off phase that I'm going to talk about here in a minute, they're just a different kind of pumpkin and they don't last as long. My pumpkins I can get easy 6 to 9 months out of good cold storage out of mine if you go through the whole process. But those pumpkins, you'll find that won't be the case on those. So curing pumpkins. You want to put them in a warm, sunny location after you've harvested them that's around 80 to 85 degrees. You want to leave them there for 2 weeks. And then for best results, you flip them and leave them for another 2 weeks so that they get completely hardened off on all their sides. This ensures that the skin will endure the time frame that you're putting it away. I know one of the things that I have done in the past, I'm not eating them, so it's not a big of a deal, but like even on pumpkins that I had on my front porch, this is before I started growing them for animals when I lived in the city. If you get a nick in your pumpkin, you can put clear fingernail polish over that nick. It'll seal up and it won't ruin your pumpkin. And nobody sees it. So if you get a little cut, which can happen so easy on some of those pumpkins, that's a great way to stop it from decaying real quickly. Now when you store them, you want to always store them on a rack where the bottom has an air movement or on paper. There's several things you do not want to store them on, which is concrete, linoleum. That will actually bring moisture out of the pumpkin and it will rot in a very short time. I found that out because the first couple times I set one on my front porch just on the concrete, it rotted very quickly. I was like, what happened here? It was perfectly fine. But that concrete just pulls the moisture out. So one of the things I do, I brought several of these to show. I'll set them on top of pots. It looks decorative, but it also has a multi-purpose. It keeps their little bottom up off the ground. And I'll even turn this big one upside down. So you have the pumpkin sitting up here, and it gives it a little stand, kind of says, hey, I'm a pumpkin, aren't I cute? So, let's see. Yeah, do not stack your pumpkins. Never put your pumpkins on top of each other. I always cringe when I go in the grocery store and you see those big boxes of piles of pumpkins. I'm like, those pumpkins in the bottom are just toast. There's just no way they're gonna. Now, hopefully, they're all bought soon, so they get a chance to not become mush. But that really is bad for pumpkins to be stacked like that. You should always check your pumpkins at least once a week, wherever you store them after you have put them into. Okay, so you take them from the warm, sunny place. Now you put them into a cool place, and that cool place needs to be between 55 and 58 degrees. I've had it go up to 64 in my cold room and they do okay. You want low humidity, so try to, in this part of the world that's difficult to do. But we do have a dehumidifier in that room that pulls the humidity out, so that helps. Because when you're storing things long term, humidity is an enemy of long-term storage of anything. So that's another way to do that. Again, it needs to be well ventilated and with no sunlight, if at all possible. Because the darker the place, the better the longevity of your pumpkin being able to last. Also, do not store apples or pears next to your pumpkins because they emit something that causes your pumpkin to rot very quickly. So if you have apples or pears, you need to put them in a completely different location from where your pumpkins are being stored. There is also another thing, I've never done this, but I was reading this. You can do a mild pouring rinse of your pumpkin if you feel like you want to just get it an extra layer of protection. You mix 1 cup of your household chlorine bleach to 5 gallons of cold water. Dip your pumpkin in, give it a good rub down. My only problem with that is I'm trying to dry them out, so I didn't want to add more moisture to them. So I've never done that, but they say it actually helps. So, okay, here's a picture of my storage area. You can see, this is one of the things I brought too, is to show you my boxes. Don't you just love Costco and Sam's? You can get these things for free. So every time I'm in there, I'm always scoping them out because I put these on the shelves in my cold room. And even though they're wire, I've had a few go bad and they drip. So you don't want that. So this contains it. But not only that, if you can see in that picture there, I have puppy pads underneath mine, which also absorb. If any moisture starts to come out, the puppy pad will absorb it. You could throw that away and your box is still good. You can still use it long term. So I'm always trying to think of how to get the most use out of what I have. But and the puppy pads have that nice soft material between that and the plastic, so it's not going to sweat your pumpkin. But it's real easy to then I go through and just lift up their little pumpkin and check its little bottom to make sure it's not drippy and goopy into there. So, okay, seed saving. I'm a big fan of seed saving anyway, but pumpkins are just in a category all of their own. There's an ideal time to save seeds from a pumpkin, and that is when it's 20 days after it's harvested. So it gives time for those seeds to really finish maturing inside there. And the key to that is looking at the stem. If the stem is still green, it's not the best to pull seeds from. You want that stem to turn dry. So when the stem turns brown, that's the time to harvest your seeds. And if you've never cut a pumpkin and tried to solely for the reason of harvesting seeds, you want to make a partial cut. You don't want to go all the way through because the center of it is basically, where the seeds reside, and it's more open. And so you don't want to cut those seeds if at all possible. So you take your knife and just do it all the way around, and then you can get it like a butter knife in there and just pry it, and this thing just pops open. And then you don't have any torn up seeds inside. So that's another way to help you get those out. And unfortunately, really using your hands is one of the best ways to get the seeds out. I mean, you can try spoons. I've done spoons, but it will help with some of it. After I get the majority of it out, I'll take a spoon and scrape the inside. But, there's just something about getting your hands dirty. It's the best way to do it. Some people actually have said they used a ice cream scoop, which might work. Depends on how sharp it is. You want a good edge on it. When you're pulling the seeds out, obviously you don't want to have all the yellow inside stringy stuff in the end. So it's a process, and it takes a little while. But as you begin to clean them, don't worry too much about that. It's going to all come out by the time you get done washing it. So I put it in a big colander, and under cool running water, I just wash and use my hands and you're rubbing those. Sometimes you actually have to kind of pry some of that right off of the seeds themselves, picking out the big clumps as you can, and then just continue to wash them for quite some time. You really want as much of that residue off as possible. Then you let the seeds completely dry. You put them either on a baking sheet. You can put them on a piece of newspaper or paper towel. One of the things I like to do after they're beyond the just got out of the colander state, when they're mostly dry, I then move them to foil. And the reason I do that is because I can write on the foil what it is, and I have a dehydrator, and I just stick it in the dehydrator. I don't dehydrate them. They're just in a holding pattern there. But I know which pumpkin it came from. because I've got 10 racks in there. So it's a great way to just stick them in there and forget about them, come back a week or two later. They're dry, you know what it is. Now you can package them up and you don't have to guess. And they just pop right off that foil really, really well. Let's see. Oh, and package them in paper envelopes if at all possible, not plastic. You can buy these off Amazon, they're wonderful. And I package all my seeds in them, and you can write on it the year, what pumpkin it came from, and share with friends, which I brought a bunch to share today. But you do want to give them plenty of time to dry. A good 4 weeks is recommended, just to make sure that they're completely dry. Now, obviously you won't be turning around and putting them in the ground, but if you're turning around and putting them straight in the ground, that's not necessary. But, you know, unless you harvest in June and want to turn around and plant them again, you will be saving them. So, average lifespan of a pumpkin seed is 4 years. So you get some time frame out of those seeds when you get it. But just know this, the older the seed, the slower the germination, or the lower the germination rate. So just kind of gauge that accordingly. Roasting seeds. Now I did put a recipe at the bottom of Jamelle's wonderful cake recipe for roasting pumpkin seeds. There's 100 things out there that you can pull up and get ideas on roasting pumpkin seeds. But it's a great way to add nutrition, and you can put it on top of salads or just eat it plain straight up as a snack. They're really a wonderful way to go. Okay, carving pumpkins. I'm not a fan of carving pumpkins. I did carve a few pumpkins in my day, but it is really not my favorite thing in the world. But as all of you know, if you've tried to carve a pumpkin, well, let me say this. I had a dear friend who came over from England, and of course she'd never carved a pumpkin before, and she was all excited about carving her first pumpkin. And well, she called me one day and she was like, "What happened to my pumpkin? It's black." I'm like, it was like still 2 weeks till Halloween, and I'm like, you carved it already? She's like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "Oh no, you carve a pumpkin like the day before Halloween." Otherwise it will be completely worthless, rotten, and awful. And so there's a lot of, things about carving a pumpkin. It takes, a strong arm to cut those things. It's just not as easy. One of the things to look for if you are going to carve a pumpkin is you want to look for a large pumpkin without any blemishes on the skin. Again, you want to look for an older pumpkin, so you want to look for the handle or the stem to be brown. So it's older, so it's a better one to carve. And keep in mind, the higher the humidity, the faster your pumpkin's going to decay. So just know that. However, in this process, I learned some things I didn't know. So this is what happens to your pumpkin after a short amount of time. He begins to decay. But there are several things you can do, including washing your pumpkin after you have carved it and got it all ready to sit on your front porch, that will lengthen its ability to last. So if you have grandbabies or anybody else that likes to carve pumpkins, this is a good option for you. After you've carved your pumpkin, you rinse it out with water to get rid of all the excess gunk. Take a large bucket and fill it with 3 gallons of water. Stir in 3 teaspoons of bleach. Dunk the pumpkin and be sure to hold it down because it will try to float. And you want that solution to be in there. Now, obviously you need to wear gloves, and I recommend doing this outside. Remove, it just helps remove all of that from the pumpkin. Then pull it out and let it air dry, and then you're good to go. Now, here's a couple other small options. Number one, there's a new pumpkin spray, evidently, called Pumpkin Fresh, that you can spray on the inside of your pumpkin. But you can also use a mixture of dish soap and peppermint oil sprayed on the inside of your pumpkin. Supposedly it helps the decay. You can add an open silicone packet inside there, like those water absorbent packet things. Just open it up and sprinkle some of those inside of there. You just don't want to have an animal get a hold of those, so just keep that in mind. The last one, all the men will appreciate this, you can spray it with WD-40. So, anyway, WD-40, the answer to everything, I guess. So, there's some ways to help your pumpkin last. So, there's a lot of creative ideas out there of what to do with your pumpkin, how to use it. I mean, you can use your stem as part of the pumpkin face. Some people get really creative. Those are can tops for a pop can on the braces. I mean, somebody just got really clever with some of these. I actually did this one year. I did it with about 4 or 5 small pumpkins and had a whole display. This is back when I lived in the city and people could actually see my front yard. And it was a lot of fun. Of course, my husband had to get roped in because I couldn't get the drill through there. And we did varying sizes, and it was more of a hodgepodge. It wasn't a straight line like that. It was more like the one on the next there. But it was really pretty. I really love those. It's a cool way to do it. You can also supposedly take cookie cutters, if they're strong enough, with a piece of wood and a hammer, and get you an indentation, and then supposedly this works. Never tried it. I have done the one that's the white pumpkin on the side. This was really cool. What we did is we just cut a pumpkin in slices, cut out the holes, and then inside of it you have like a glass jar that you put a candle in, and then those are raisins. So you just make it creative without having to do a carving pumpkin. There are ways around it. So, and I thought this was cute. If you really don't want to carve anything, this is another one. You just wrap it up like a mummy. And then this one, this is what I'm actually going to show you. I did this back when I was in Dallas, and I just loved the idea because I didn't have to ruin my pumpkins. So this is a felt mask that's actually 2 pieces, your felt mask and your eyes. And you just pin it to your pumpkin and then tie the little string around it. So you're not actually hurting your pumpkin, and when Halloween's over you can take it off and still have a pumpkin. So anyway, I thought that was a very clever way of doing pumpkins. And then of course painting pumpkins. There's some more painting pumpkins. This is Bejeweled Pumpkins. And then of course, you know, I love that one over there. That's more befitting of the country. And some other ideas, but you can't do it without that one. And but decorating with pumpkins is one of my favorite things. I have lots and lots of pumpkin decorations, and I like to mix real and fake together on my table. I will say this, if you're going to mix them, you always need something underneath your real pumpkin to prevent it from messing up your table or tablecloth if they do start to go bad. Just like the pumpkins in my cold room, I pick it up and peek at it every now and then because you don't want it to go bad without you knowing it. Chances are in the short time frame it's in your house and your temperature and humidity is going to be perfectly fine. You won't have an issue, but I have had 1 or 2 go bad. So you just want to be careful with that. There's some other pumpkin ideas where you can actually do floral or succulents inside of them. And some other ones there. And more table decorations. And you can see we all came together and decorated the tables with various things. There's lots of ways to decorate with pumpkins. Pumpkins are just wonderful. I just think there's just so many things you can do with them.
Okay, my name's Tammi Wagnon, and I love growing gourds. They're a lot of fun and they're easy to grow.
Sorry.
Okay, what is a gourd? It's a hard shell, non-edible fruit, a cousin to the cucumber, squash, and melon, and it grows on a tendril-bearing vine. The difference between the gourd and the pumpkin is there's not a lot of difference. You don't eat the hard shell gourds, and of course you can eat the pumpkins. And they both grow on vines, tendrils, don't know what these are. And you can use the gourds. I like to decorate with them and paint on them, as you can see. And the gourds will last a long time, a real long time. And of course the pumpkins won't. And so gourds have been the early water bottles of the Egyptians since 2200 to 2400 BC. And they were used for dippers, like, I don't have a long one, well, this kind of dipper gourd. You know, dippers for the water well, and let's see, and storage containers. And today, most of them are for novelty, you know, for painting and decorating with. You can make masks out of them, musical instruments. There's just lots of fun things to make with them. Okay, and the types of board, ornamental, this type of board is the most popular in America. Basket board, this is an example of a basket board. This is a bushel board, but it's in the basket family.
Tell them how much that would be.
It's called a 100-pound bushel because when it's growing, it weighs like 100 pounds because gourds are 90% water, so they're super heavy. Okay, and then a bottle gourd has a base bulb and a neck at the stem end, and it can have 2 bulbs. So let's see here. Here we go. This is like considered a bottle gourd. I call it snowman gourd. And then here's a little one. You know, they're all different sizes. And dipper gourd, it has a bulb at the bottom end and a long thin neck. So this is considered a dipper gourd. It's called a club, but it's in that family. That would be a dipper gourd. And this loofah, everybody knows what a loofah gourd is. These are some dried ones that haven't been peeled yet. And a snake gourd. It's long and it doesn't have a bulb. And here's an example of a snake gourd. Back here. Okay, growing gourds. You want to start with fertilized soil. They like sandy soil, and I use horse manure, cow manure, and I usually start maybe in January, getting my garden, getting the beds ready. They like full sun, and they like a lot of water, at least an inch of water a week. They're a lot like pumpkins, but the more water that you give them during their growing season, like the bigger they'll get. They need a sturdy fence or an arbor or trellis. They need something big to grow on. I use cattle panels over mine. And last year with all the rain that we got, I didn't hardly have to water at all, but there were so many gourds, my cattle panels started sacking. So I'll have to come up with something different this year, or for next year. And I plant my seeds in early April after the last frost, and I make, a little mound, and I usually put 3 or 4 seeds in it just to make sure, I get a plant out of them. And that's a picture of my gourds last year. That's the outside picture. And I put this picture in here. This is our bull. He's about 18 months old. And I've been growing gourds for over 20 years off and on. And I've never had an issue. We've had horses and cows and, of course, deer. And I've never had an issue with anybody eating on them, except he did this last year. And so the gourds that are on the ground, they were on the fence. This is on the outside of the fence because he can't get on the inside of my garden. But luckily they were all dying, so the gourds were fine. I just had to go get them up, and I had to cut up all the gourds off that were on the outside of my garden fence because he ate every one of those dead vines. So now I'm like, I don't know, what am I going to do? That is a baby loofah gourd. The loofahs have yellow flowers, whereas these hardshell gourds, they have white flowers. And they also, on the main vine is the male flower, and then the lateral vines are the female flowers, which have the fruit. And that's just another seed where my cattle panel's sagging. And those gourds are touching the ground because they grow on top and underneath, and there was a ton of them. Okay, so harvesting your gourds. They're about 120 to 140 days as their growing season, and usually end of August, 1st September, I don't water them as much because that's when they're going to start hardening off. And you can leave them on the vine, till the spring if you want to, or I just cut these yesterday to show y'all. This is a loofah, and it's starting to dry because the stem is brown. You want to wait until the stem is brown and see it start to dry. And then this is a banana gourd, and it's starting, but these still have a little bit of weight to them because they're really heavy in the growing process because they're 90% water. And they're all different shades of green. Pretty cool. Okay, and let's see. And it usually, no, you're fine. It usually takes about 3 or 4 months, up to 6 months for them to dry, depending on the size of them, how big they are. And that's just a loofah that I started peeling to get the sponge out of. Okay, and then so when they're nice and dry, here's the seeds shaking in them. They're ready if you want to wash them. And you just need a sink of water or a tub of water. If you want to put a little bit of dishwashing liquid in it, you can. You don't have to. Or if you want to put a little bit of bleach in it, you can. Anyway, so you want to put them in there and soak them for about 10 or 15 minutes. And then you can start scrubbing them. It takes elbow grease. And I just use these plastic scrubbies or the stainless steel scrubby. And you know, since they're hollow, and you stick several in there, they're going to be floating around. So you can take a wet washcloth and get it wet, just maybe like lay it on the top of them if you want to get this skin to get softer where you can clean it. Because no matter if you try to turn it over, it's going to go back over here because it goes wherever the seeds are. It floats like that. So let's see, and then you let them dry. Sun's out, you can set them outside and let them dry, you know, till the next morning in the sun, and then they're ready for you to paint. Alright. Okay, uses for boards. You can carve on them. You can burn a design on them. You can use like a Dremel tool. I don't really do any carving on them. But they make good bird houses. I have made bird houses out of them, and you just use like a hole saw, and you know you can make a little circle out. If you want to get seeds out of them, but you don't want to paint your gourd or you don't want to do anything to it, you know you can just cut a little hole in the bottom, take that little piece of gourd out, and shake all your seeds out, and then you can stick that little piece of gourd that you cut off. You can stick it back on the bottom and glue it back in. They'll never know the difference. This is this is a gourd. It's called a tobacco box gourd. My husband cut it for me, so I don't know if you'll see the inside of it. This is like the pulp and stuff. It's all dry, of course, and then there's seeds. And when you're making a birdhouse gourd, you want to shake all the seeds out, and you might clean a little bit of the pulp out of the inside, but you don't have to clean it all because the birds like to use it to make their nest. Okay, that's just a picture of a birdhouse gourd, and some of the other gourds, just decorations with them. And that's carving the gourds, which I already talked a little bit about.
You said you could leave the gourds till spring and not pick them off the vine?
Oh yeah, I didn't talk about that much, did I? You can.
So they don't rot or anything, you can just leave them?
Right, yeah, they won't rot. So if you're going to pick them, then you need to wait till the stem is brown and put them in like in your shop or your barn, and where they get good airflow. You know, they don't need to be touching each other while they're drying. And if you put them, I usually put mine on a pallet and dry them, and every couple of weeks I'll go and I'll pick it up and I'll move them to another spot where it's, because you can see where it's kind of damp where they're in. And I always like to set them on the bottom because I want their bottoms to be flat. You know, so they'll set up. They don't always work that way, but most of the time you can do that with them.